Hello and welcome. My name's George, and my channel is all about helping you get the most out of Logic Pro so that you can record and produce your best music in your home studio. If you want to keep seeing more videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. Today we're continuing with part 3 of our GarageBand to Logic Pro series. We'll be looking at all the different session musicians found in Logic Pro, as well as the chord track that accompanies them. So let's dive in. Okay, so for starters, let's first take a look at GarageBand quickly. And in GarageBand, we have the drummer. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a drummer track. So if you're a GarageBand user, you might be familiar with the drummer, which creates drum tracks for you based on the different type of style that you select. And also we have these individual drummers, which each have their kind of specialty. So Kyle, for instance, is the pop rock guy. Logan is the retro rock guy. And down here, this is where we can kind of craft and shape our drum pattern a little bit more. So we've got loud, soft, simple, complex, and we can move this little ball around that. And you'll see up here that it'll change the pattern depending on the settings we have here. And then we have additional settings here where we can select the different pieces of the drum kit that we want to use. And we have some different patterns for each instrument as well. So the kick and snare has 8 patterns, the cymbals have 4, and we can add in some percussion as well if we'd like. Now let's jump over to Logic and see how it differs a little bit. So when we first create a new track, you'll see here we have the option of a drummer track as well as bass player and keyboard player in the session player family. We're going to start with the drummer, and we'll be checking out the bass player and keyboard player later as well. Now, you can right off the bat choose a drummer style here, and you'll see all the different styles we have, or we can change this later as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with pop rock, and we'll adjust afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And same as GarageBand, it populated a little region here with a drum loop. And right off the bat, that sounds like this. So a nice straight ahead pop rock drum beat. Now you'll notice down here, it looks a little bit different than it did in GarageBand, but it's essentially the same layout. Now, in version 10 of Logic Pro, the drummer looked exactly like it did in GarageBand, but when the Logic Pro 11 update happened, then the drummer changed slightly. But really, it's very similar. So if we want to change the drummer style, all we got to do is click here where it says pop rock, and here we can change all the different styles. And we no longer have the individual drummer names. Like we don't have Kyle anymore for pop rock. It's just pop rock. And no more Logan for retro rock. It's just retro rock. But it's essentially the same. Now when we change styles, it's also going to change the drum kit along with it. So if you happen to be messing around and you like the kit, you can uncheck this change patch and it'll keep the current kit that you have and just change the drummer style. Now we can also change from not only acoustic drums, but electronic, percussion. And from here, we can also change it to be the bass player or a keyboard player. But for now, we're just going to focus on the drum. So I'm just going to keep it to acoustic drummer. Maybe let's go with funk rock. We can close that. Now in this video, since I'm going to be going through all the different session musicians, this will be a bit more of an overview of each of the session musicians. I have dedicated videos for each of the different session musicians if you want to dive in deeper. So now that we changed to funk rock, let's just have a listen to how that sounds. Cool. Now, one of the biggest things we can change right off the bat is just the tempo. And that happens up here where it says 110. So let's say we drag that down to maybe 100. And the drummer will follow the tempo. Cool. And then here we have the complexity and intensity. So that's basically the same as that XY axis we had in GarageBand. And then here, very similar to GarageBand, is where we can turn on and off the different drum parts. So our kick and snare and our hi-hats, toms, and cymbals. And then here is where we can change the actual pattern. And we have a bit more of a visual representation of what that pattern is. So you can see kind of where the hits are happening for the kick and snare, for example. So we could change this, let's say, to number 5. And then same thing with the hi-hats. We have different hi-hat patterns that we can check out. Let's see what that sounds like. Okay, cool. And then we can adjust the amount of fills that we have. So if you want, fills to happen more often, you can juice that up. Or if you want them a little more subtle, you can do that. And then the fill complexity. So when there's a fill, how complex do we want the fill to be? And then if we want to get even deeper, we have details where we can adjust ghost notes and, the hi-hats, for example, how we want those to sound. So we can set them to automatic, close, half open, open and wide open. And we can mess with the feel, push and pull, and the dynamics as well. Now, the cool thing we don't get in GarageBand is this manual pattern. So on the main page, we have these patterns that we can choose from, but we can also set a manual pattern. So for example, if I do my kick on 1 and 3 and my snare on 2 and 4, that's kind of your basic rock pattern. So that just sounds like this. But then you can start playing around with it, and mainly messing around with the kick is what's going to kind of change it up for you. And if you want a longer pattern, well, you can change the length to 2 bars, for example. Now, before we start adding in some of the other instruments, like the bass and the keyboard, I want to introduce you to the chord track, because the melodic and harmonic instruments, they're going to follow the chords that we have set up in the chord track. So it's a good thing to kind of do that ahead of time. So if you go up here where it says show and hide global tracks, here you'll see one called Chord. And if you're not seeing that, you can right click in here and just make sure that that chord is selected. Now there's different chord progressions that are already pre-built that you can use if you're not super familiar with writing different chord progressions. So if you right click in here and you see chord progression, and then we have these different Roman numerals. So 251, for example, so that's talking about the different chords in the scale. So for example, right now we're in C major, which is set up here. So 2 would be the second note, which would be D, and 5 would be the fifth note of C, which is G, and 1 is C. If we are in the key of A, 1 would be A, 2 would be B, and 3 would actually be C sharp. So let's say we wanted this 1-5-6-4 chord progression. We can click on that, and that loads that in like so. And I'll actually just drag this to the very beginning. So now we have our chord progression in there. And if we decide we want to change our key, for example, let's say we want to be in the key of G. Then it'll ask you if it wants to transpose. So you can transpose and then automatically it follows that key. Now, if you wanted to create your own chord progression, you can simply go over here and hit the little plus button, and you can select your different root notes, the quality of the chord, major or minor. You can add different extensions if you want. So you can make it a major seventh. If you want the bass note to be something other than the root, you can select that. Or you can even just play in a chord using your MIDI keyboard. So you click on this little button here, and if I play in, let's say, a C minor 7, here we go, up here, C minor 7. And let's say I want to quickly go to the next chord, I can just hit tab on my typing keyboard, and that'll go over to the next bar. Then I can type in my next chord. Let's go D minor, for example, and so on and so on. So I'm actually just going to delete what I put in. I'm just going to select and hit the delete key. And why don't we just add in another variation on what we did. I'll just drag this there. And maybe let's go one more chord progression and drag that over there. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to shorten this in half. So I'm going to go ungroup chords just by right-clicking, and then I'm going to delete those chords. Then I'm going to hit Shift, select all those. I can regroup them. We'll drag these ones over. Now I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going to go double chord rhythm. And now those chords are going to happen twice as fast, just to give us a little bit of variation there. Now, before I go ahead and add in our next session musician, I'm going to show you one more thing, and that's this arrangement marker right here. And to create an arrangement marker, all you got to do is hit the little plus button, and then you'll see we have kind of different sections of a song. So I'm going to reorder these a little bit. If you click here where it says intro, I'm just going to make this our verse. So we're just going to skip the intro. And then I'm going to make this to be the pre-chorus, but we'll just call it bridge. And then this will be our chorus. Now, myself, I generally don't use the arrangement feature. I prefer the markers myself, and they kind of do the same thing, except for one important thing, which I'll talk about in a second. So the markers, you can line up and put those where you want them as well. And same thing, we can rename this. The markers don't have kind of pre-made titles like the arrangement does. And if you choose to color these, you can go option C, which brings up our color palette. And you can color these to kind of define the sections a little bit more. And you can do the same for the arrangement. Okay, so now the biggest difference between the marker and arrangement is the session players will actually follow the arrangement. And if you move things around, let's say I move this verse over here, well, you see the drummer moved with it. So all your tracks and everything are kind of tied to these arrangement markers. So in one sense, that's cool. On the other sense, it makes me a little bit nervous that everything's tied there. So if I make a change or accidentally hit delete, it'll delete all the tracks under your verse, for example. So I'm a little weary about that. However, I'm showing this because it is cool when it comes to the session musicians, as you'll see in a second. Okay, so I'm actually going to delete the drummer that we created. And now I'm going to right click in here and go create session player region. Now I'm just going to go over to the drummer and click on the little plus button, and that's going to add another region. And you can see that it followed my arrangement marker, and same thing with the chorus. And if you look here at the complexity and intensity, they change based on the arrangement as well. So on the chorus, it's full intensity. So that's one of the cool things about the arrangement. And now we can minimize this, and you'll keep seeing your markers up here. I will say you can suspend the content connection between the two, which now if I delete this, it doesn't mess with everything down here. But in one sense, it kind of defeats the purpose of having the arrangement anyways. You might as well just be using markers. So I'll go ahead and unsuspend that and close this. And now we're left with just the regular markers. So let's go ahead and add in a bass session player. And again, we can choose our different styles here. Let me choose the upright to start. I'm going to uncheck this default chord progression because we already created a chord progression. So this would be if you haven't yet created one. And let's go create. And again, you saw how it followed the arrangement, as well as the chords. So let's just have a quick listen to what this sounds like. So there we go. We got a little tune right off the bat. So let's take a look about here. So very similar to the setup with the drummer. And again, we can change to different bass players. And we have our complexity and intensity that for each different region, we have a different setting for. Now, same as the drummer, we have different patterns that we can follow. And maybe we'll simplify it for the first little bit, verse, we'll call it. Sure. And the other thing we can do is here where it says follow rhythm of, we can set that to this smash, which is the name of our drum set. And then it'll kind of line up the bass with the drums a little bit better. And if we want to simplify things some more, like for example, melody, we can just go root only. And then some notes for the pre-chorus and more notes for the chorus. Now let's go ahead and add our keyboard into the mix. So hit the plus button once more. Let's go keyboard player. And we have different keyboard styles freely, so that's a little bit more melodic. Broken chords is melodic as well, but staying more chordal. Block chords would just be kind of straight chords being played. And arpeggiated and simple pad. The pad is going to be more for synths and things like that, which maybe we'll add afterwards. When we start with freely. and let's just see what it sounds like. Cool. So again, there's a little bit of a tune we got going on. So again, very similar controls, complexity and intensity. Maybe we'll bring the intensity up a little bit in our chorus. And maybe we'll bring down the complexity in our verse. And I noticed in the bridge or pre-chorus that it sounded a little bit muddy in the range, right? It's a little bit low. So you can actually change that here with the right hand. We can bring that up a little bit. And maybe let's make the movement kind of in the medium range. Cool. And why don't we go ahead and add one more keyboard player, and we'll use the simple pad. But instead of being the whole time, let's just add that in the chorus. So let's see what that sounds like. Just helps beef things up a little bit. Let's bring everything down a little bit because we're getting in the red a little bit there. Now, the one thing with the simple pad is since we're changing chords quite often, sometimes the chords kind of linger from one into the next. I'll let you hear that on its own. So maybe we can shorten the note length a little bit. And let's just do root only in the left hand. Let's see how that sounds. Cool. Well, there's a little overview on the chord track and the session musicians, and hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can put this to work in your own sessions. In next week's video, we're going to be creating a song from scratch, not only using the session musicians, but all the different tracks available to us in Logic Pro. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments below. And if you want to dive deeper into Logic Pro, don't forget to download my free Ultimate Logic Pro Starter Pack. This includes my Logic Pro Hotkey cheat sheet, my audio recording guide, my mixing guide, my gear guide, as well as my Logic Pro session templates. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.